I never thought it would happen. I never thought I'd cross a line I could never uncross, and certainly not with him. My husband's best friend was always around. He was practically family. But what happened in the bedroom that night shattered everything I thought I knew about myself, my marriage, and the people I trusted. What he did left me breathless, terrified, and questioning everything. If you think you know where this story is going, let me tell you, you don't. It started innocently enough. My husband, Liam, and his best friend Jake had been inseparable since college. Wherever Liam went, Jake wasn't far behind. At first, I didn't mind. Jake was charming, the life of the party, and always made me laugh. But over time, something shifted. Liam was working longer hours, barely home, and when he was too exhausted to spend time with me. I tried to be understanding, it wasn't his fault. But the loneliness started to creep in, and Jake was always there to fill the void. At first, it was small things. He'd compliment me on my hair, my dress, or the way I decorated the house. Things Liam used to notice but didn't anymore. Jake had a way of making me feel seen, like I was the most important person in the room. I should have set boundaries. I should have told him to stop, but I didn't. One night, Liam called to say he'd be working late again. I wasn't surprised. It had become the norm. Jake happened to be over, as he often was, and offered to stay and keep me company. I hesitated but eventually agreed. After all, he was Liam's best friend. What harm could it do? We ordered takeout, opened a bottle of wine, and talked for hours. Jake was funny, attentive, and surprisingly vulnerable. He told me things he said he'd never told anyone before. About his failed relationships, his insecurities, his regrets. I felt myself letting my guard down in a way I hadn't in years. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that caught me completely off guard. "You know, Liam doesn't deserve you." I froze, unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me, his eyes intense. "You're incredible. Smart, beautiful, kind. Liam's lucky to have you, but he doesn't appreciate you the way he should." My heart raced. Part of me wanted to shut the conversation down, to tell him he was out of line, but another part of me liked what he was saying. That night, nothing happened, but the seed had been planted. Over the next few weeks, Jake started coming over more often, always finding an excuse to be around. I told myself it was harmless. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't just the way he looked at me when Liam wasn't paying attention. It was the way my pulse quickened every time he walked into the room, the way I caught myself thinking about him when I shouldn't. I was playing with fire, and I knew it. But I couldn't stop. The night everything changed started like any other. Liam was out of town for work, and Jake offered to help me fix a leaky faucet in the bathroom. After he finished, I thanked him and offered him a drink. One drink turned into 2, then 3, and before I knew it, we were sitting on the edge of the bed, laughing like old friends. That's when he leaned in. I wish I could say I pulled away, that I told him to leave. But I didn't. His lips were on mine, and in that moment all the guilt, all the reasons why this was wrong, disappeared. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a spark. A fire. Something I hadn't felt in years. But as quickly as it started, it ended. I pulled back, my mind racing. "We can't do this," I said, my voice trembling. Jake looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Why not?" he asked. "You deserve to be happy. Doesn't Liam make you happy anymore?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Did Liam make me happy? I didn't know the answer anymore. Jake left shortly after, and I spent the rest of the night lying awake, replaying the kiss over and over in my mind. I knew I needed to tell Liam, to come clean about everything, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The next morning, I decided to put it behind me. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness, and it wouldn't happen again. But Jake had other plans. He started texting me. Little things at first, like, "I can't stop thinking about you," or "I've never felt this way about anyone before." I ignored him at first, but the more he reached out, the harder it became to resist. One night, when Liam was out late again, Jake showed up at the house unannounced. I told him he couldn't be there, that we needed to stop whatever this was before it went any further. But he didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine. "You can't tell me you don't feel it too," he said, his voice low. "I know you do." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I didn't feel anything, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down I knew he was right. Before I knew it, we were in the bedroom. What happened next is something I'll never forget. The intensity, the passion, it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. For a moment, I forgot about everything else. My marriage, my guilt, my betrayal. None of it mattered. But as the night wore on, reality came crashing back. What had I done? How could I face Liam, knowing what I'd just done with his best friend? The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt, shame, confusion. I tried to act normal around Liam, but every time I looked at him, I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my secret. And Jake, he was relentless. He kept texting, calling, showing up uninvited. He wanted more of me, more of what we'd shared that night. But I knew I couldn't give it to him. One night, Liam came home early and caught Jake and me in the middle of a heated argument. He demanded to know what was going on, and before I could stop him, Jake blurted out the truth. Liam's face turned white. He looked at me, then at Jake, then back at me. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to deny it, to lie, to salvage what little was left of our marriage. But I couldn't. "Yes," I said, tears streaming down my face. "It's true." What followed was a storm of anger, heartbreak, and betrayal. Liam threw Jake out of the house and told me he needed time to think. I haven't seen Jake since that night. As for Liam, he hasn't forgiven me, at least, not yet. If I've learned anything from this experience, it's that temptation is a powerful thing. It can cloud your judgment, make you do things you never thought you were capable of. But no matter how strong the temptation, the consequences are always stronger. So if you're watching this and thinking about crossing a line you can't uncross, remember this: secrets don't stay secrets forever. And when they come out, they can destroy everything. After Liam threw Jake out of the house, the silence between us was unbearable. Every glance, every shared moment, felt like a battlefield. He wouldn't talk to me, not really. He'd give me short, clipped answers, avoiding eye contact, and I could feel the anger radiating off him. But it wasn't just anger, it was pain. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, the way he clenched his jaw when he thought I wasn't looking. I tried to talk to him to explain, but what could I say? That it was a mistake? That it didn't mean anything? Both of those statements would have been lies. And the truth would have only hurt him more. One night, as we sat in the kitchen, the tension finally boiled over. "Why?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why him? Of all people, why Jake?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know," I said finally. "I was lonely, Liam. I felt invisible. And he made me feel." "Don't," Liam interrupted, his voice sharp. "Don't tell me he made you feel something I couldn't. That's a cop-out, and you know it." He was right, of course. But that didn't make it any less true. The days dragged on, each one worse than the last. Liam moved into the guest room, leaving our bed cold and empty. I cried myself to sleep more nights than I could count, wondering if there was any way to fix what I'd broken. And then there was Jake. He didn't give up easily. He started texting me again, apologizing, begging me to meet him so we could talk. I ignored him at first, but the messages kept coming. They were relentless, full of promises and excuses. "I can't stop thinking about you." It wasn't just a fling for me, it meant something. "I know you feel the same way." And the worst part? A tiny, shameful part of me wanted to respond. One day, I finally broke. I met him at a coffee shop, desperate to put an end to the chaos he'd brought into my life. "What do you want from me, Jake?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I want you," he said, his eyes boring into mine. "I know I messed up, but I can't let this go. I can't let you go." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "It's over, Jake. Whatever this was, it's done. I can't." My voice cracked, and I had to take a deep breath to steady myself. "I can't lose Liam. I won't." Jake didn't take it well. His expression hardened, and for a moment, I didn't even recognize him. "So that's it?" he said, his voice cold. "You're just going to go back to him, pretend like none of this ever happened." "It's not about pretending," I said. "It's about fixing what I broke." He scoffed, shaking his head. "You think he's going to forgive you? You think he's just going to forget that you slept with his best friend?" His words cut deep, but I didn't let them show. "That's not your concern," I said, standing up. "Stay away from me, Jake, and stay away from Liam." But Jake wasn't done. A few days later, Liam confronted me with a text Jake had sent him. A long, rambling confession that laid everything bare. Jake had poured his heart out, painting himself as the victim, claiming that I'd seduced him, that he'd been powerless to resist. It was a twisted version of the truth, and I could see the doubt in Liam's eyes as he read it aloud. "Is this what really happened?" he asked, his voice breaking. Did you manipulate him?" "No," I said, my voice rising in panic. "Liam, you have to believe me. It wasn't like that. I take full responsibility for what I did, but Jake knew exactly what he was doing. He's trying to twist this to save himself." Liam didn't respond. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable, and then walked out of the room. I felt the ground slipping out from under me. No matter how many times I apologized, no matter how much I tried to explain, it felt like I was losing him. As the weeks turned into months, Liam and I settled into an uneasy truce. He didn't move out, but he didn't move back into our bedroom either. We coexisted, like strangers sharing the same house, tiptoeing around each other, avoiding the elephant in the room. Every now and then, I'd catch him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher: anger, sadness, maybe even longing. But he never said anything, and I didn't push. I started seeing a therapist, desperate to make sense of everything that had happened. She told me I needed to forgive myself before I could expect Liam to forgive me. But how could I? Every time I thought about that night with Jake, I felt sick. One day, Liam surprised me by coming home early. He found me sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, and for the first time in months, he sat down beside me. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," he said, his voice quiet. "But I miss you. I miss us." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I reached for his hand. "I miss us too," I said, my voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, Liam. Anything." He nodded, his jaw tight. "It's going to take time. And it's going to take honesty, real honesty. No more lies, no more secrets." "I promise," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "No more lies." We started going to couples therapy, and slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. There were days when the anger and resentment bubbled to the surface, threatening to tear us apart all over again. But there were also moments of hope, moments where I felt like we might actually make it through this. As for Jake, he was out of our lives for good. Liam cut all ties with him, and I blocked his number, determined to never speak to him again. Looking back, I can see the cracks in our marriage that led us to this point. But I also see the strength it took for us to face those cracks head-on, to confront the pain and betrayal, and try to find a way forward. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that love isn't perfect. It's messy, complicated, and sometimes downright painful. But if it's real, if it's worth fighting for, it can survive even the darkest of times. So here we are, still standing, still trying, still healing. It's not a fairy tale, and it never will be. But it's real. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.